Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the tonight Development Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Abdul Mukit, and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being webcast live on the Council's website, and the public and press may follow meeting remotely. I will now ask the committee members present to introduce themselves. It would be helpful if you could also state any declaration of interest that you may have in agenda items and the nature of the interest. Confirm the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 23rd August 2021 as a correct record. All right. Councillor Kevin Brady?
I'm Councillor Kevin Brady. I have no declarations for this meeting. Minutes-wise, I don't think I was at that meeting, was I? So I can't confirm the minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Kahar Chaudhry.
Councillor Kahar Chaudhry, no DPIs to declare on the agenda items for this evening, and I can confirm the minutes as a true record. True and accurate.
Shall we ask Councillor Lima? She's not voting, so can you ask her?
Yes, sure.
Councillor Lima Qureshi, can you hear me?
Hi, this is Councillor Lima Qureshi, student in the Hamlets. I have no DPI, and I'm okay.
Thank you, Lima. This is Councillor Abdul Mokid. I'm chairing the meeting. I don't have any DPI, and I confirm the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 23rd of August 2021 as a correct record. Thank you. I have received the apology for absence from Councillor Kirsten Perry. There is no any other apology. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting have already been done. Agenda item 3 is the meeting guidance. Please, can Paul Buckingham present the guidance, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee members, members of the public and officers in the Chamber this evening. This item just goes through the process of considering reports and recommendations. However, it does really deal with the public speaking element, and because there's only one item this evening, which is a deferred item with no public speaking, I don't propose to go through all of that in detail for everybody. It can be taken as read. For the deferred item, there will be an introduction by myself, just to set the context. Then there'll be the officer report, and then members can ask further questions, clarification, and debate the issues, and then we'll come to their decision based on a majority vote on the officer's recommendation. And if the committee proposed changes to certain aspects of the officer recommendation, for example, to add, delete, or amend planning conditions, obligations, informatives or reasons for refusal, the task of formalising those changes is delegated to the Corporate Director of Place. And in the event that the committee do not accept the officer recommendation, they must clearly state their reasons and then propose and agree an alternative course of action. The committee may be adjourned briefly for further planning or legal advice, and the task of formalising the committee's alternative decision is delegated to the Corporate Director of Place. And in circumstances where the committee proposed to make a decision which would go against the provisions of the development plan, the item may be deferred for a further report from officers dealing with the committee's proposed course of action. There is an update report that's been prepared for this evening since the publication of the agenda, and I can deal with that when we come to that item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Agenda item 4.1 is 146 Brick Lane and 25 Workspace Street, London E1 6RU. As this is a differ item, only the councillors present at the 27th April committee meeting and are here in the council chamber may vote on this item. They are myself, Councillor Kevin Brady, and Kahar Chaudhry. Councillor Lima Qureshi is also present. However, as she is attending online, she cannot vote today on this item. Please, can Paul Buckingham introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So, as you've mentioned, item 4.1 is a deferred item. It's a planning application for 140 to 146 Brick Lane and 25 Woodseer Street, London. And the proposal is the redevelopment to include the erection of a Part 5-storey building for use Class B1, plus rooftop plant and ground floor and first floor commercial units in use classes A1 and A3, and a 2-storey basement for provision of plant, servicing, storage and a gym, which is use class D2. And then there are a number of different plots, so I'll just go through this briefly. 140 Brick Lane, plot S1, is linked to the reconfigured ground floor of the adjacent building to provide commercial units, class A1, 146 Brick Lane, plot H. And refurbishments of the 2-storey extension of the adjacent building at 25 Woodseer Street, which is plot S2, for office use, class B1, with ground floor commercial units, class A3, rooftop plant and external landscaping. The recommendation to the committee is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and a legal agreement. And just by way of context, this application was considered at the Development Committee's meeting on the 27th of April, and a copy of the original report has been appended to this report. And as set out in the minutes of the meeting, the committee expressed concern that further exploration was needed on the planning obligations in relation to the terms and provision of affordable workspace and retail, and a focus on supporting existing local businesses and the community cohesion aspects of those matters. So the application was deferred to allow further negotiations between officers and the applicant to see if those issues could be resolved. The application has been updated with a number of new heads of terms for the proposed Section 106 agreement that you'll see in the report and hear about in the officer presentation. So the recommendation has been set out again in full and now includes those updated obligations to deal with the reasons for refusal. The committee obviously must consider the application in the round and look at the recommendation in full. But given the time that was devoted to a range of planning issues at the April meeting, for expediency, members may wish to limit their discussion or further questions to the issues around, the issues raised by the matters for deferral. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I now invite Patrick Hounsworth, the planning officer, to give the presentation on the application, please.
Good evening, members of the committee and those watching from home. I anticipate that my presentation will last for around 15 minutes. This slide sets out the reasons for why this application was deferred on the 27th of April. I won't repeat what Paul's just said.
Sorry, Chair, can we just pause for a second, because I'm getting this twice with a slight delay. I don't know.
Teams. Sorry, Mr. Brady. I think that might have been Mark. Oh, that's a bit better, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So I think it was me. Apologies. So I won't repeat the reasons for deferral, but they're just set out on this slide. I'll give a very brief overview of the site and the proposal itself. This slide shows the site location in relation to its position along Brick Lane and Woodseer Street to the south. The site sits within the wider Truman Brewery estate, which is indicated by the yellow dashed line. The proposal comprises the redevelopment of a surface car park and refurbishment and part extension of 2 on-site buildings to provide a mixed-use office scheme. This includes flexible office floor space, 15 small and medium-sized retail units, 2 restaurants, one of which extends over the Truman Bridge over Brick Lane, just shown here, and a basement gym. The next 2 slides show the proposed floor plans, the ground floor plans. In yellow are the retail units, with very small retail units fronting Woodseer Street to the south, and other small and medium-sized retail units fronting a new internal street known as New Dray Walk, which runs through the centre of the site. This new street connects with Dray Walk, the existing Dray Walk, on the other side of Brick Lane, shown here, and connects through to a new public square in the eastern side of the site, just shown here. The blue unit shown here is one of the restaurants at the corner of Brick Lane and Woodsear Street, and the pink units just show where the entrance areas to the upper floor employment areas are and the lobby areas. This is on the other side of the site at 25 Woodsear Street, which shows the second restaurant, which opens up to the rear, fronting the new public square, which is shown here. I'll now show a few before and after images to get a feel for the proposal and the CGIs. This is a view of the corner of Brick Lane and Woodsear Street. In the existing situation, the site is bound by a high brick wall, which runs along Brick Lane, shown here, and along Woodsear Street, down this street here. The car park is on the other side of this wall. In the proposed view, it shows the new building, which is on what is currently the car park, and this CGI in particular shows the level of setback that the building achieves, which significantly widens the pavement here at Brick Lane and along Woodsear Street itself. This is an existing view along Woodsear Street. Again, the existing view shows that wall running down the edge, and a very narrow path as well, hard up against that wall. Creates a rather dead frontage and unattractive streetscape in this area. In the proposed view, we see a widened path, doubling the width of that path, new street trees, 5 small commercial units along the street, and new active frontage. This is another before and after, looking now within the site. In the existing view, you see one of the existing buildings, which is retained, but obviously reconfigured slightly. This is Block H, which is 146 Brick Lane. And this is obviously part of the car park that's on the site. And in the proposed view, this is the new Dray Walk, the new internal street, which leads to the new public square, just shown at the end of the image there. This slide shows a section diagram across Woodsear Street, with the proposed building here and the existing Woodsear Street terraces on the other side of the street. It shows how the building has been designed to step down and lean away from Woodsear Street to fairly significant degree, as you can see. And this creates a positive townscape response to the Woodsear Street terraces, while also taking into account the slight widening of the street. And this helps to also mitigate adverse amenity impacts, such as overlooking, sense of enclosure and outlook. The outdoor terraces are proposed to serve the offices on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th floors. A series of mitigation measures have been proposed to remove any adverse amenity impacts, such as planted buffer zones, obviously the step back, the step down itself, and opaque glazing. This slide just summarises the public consultation, the level of representation we received in April, and then further objections and letters of support that have been received since then. No new issues have been raised in these objections and support, other than that which has already been summarised in the original committee report, Appendix 1. So now moving to the reasons for deferral, I'll focus firstly on the affordable workspace and then on the independent retail. This slide begins by setting out the policy context for affordable workspace. And what we have here is in the local plan, we have minimum thresholds which require 10% of employment floor space at a minimum of 10% below market rates for at least 10 years. In the London plan, affordable workspace is required for a minimum of 15 years. And in the draft Spitalfields neighbourhood plan, which is going for referendum and now has significant weight, at least 45% below the neighbourhood area's indicative market rate for a minimum of 12 years subject to viability. So this sets out the policy context. The offer presented in April Development Committee was affordable workspace that was 30% below market rate for a period of 10 years, and there was no restriction on business size. In the proposed for this deferred item, we have 45 affordable workspace that's 45% below market rate for a period of 15 years. When compared to policy, this discount would exceed the Council's local plan policy requirement and would be in line with the draft Spitalfields neighbourhood plan policy, and the proposed 15-year duration would exceed the minimum durations in the local plan and the draft neighbourhood plan and would meet the requirements of the London plan. In the update report, we have set out indicative affordable workspace rates for how this would look in real terms at around £22 to £25 per square foot. In terms of the size of businesses targeted, this has been negotiated to comprise the definition of small businesses under the Companies Act 2006, and using the current definition, this would mean satisfying two or more of the following criteria, which is a turnover of no more than 10.2 million, a balance sheet total not more than 5.1 million, or employees not more than 50. In terms of the workspace strategy, this would be required to be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority as part of the Section 106 agreement, and it has undergone further negotiation to address the reasons for deferral. This includes the fit-out and specification of the workspace, which shall be Category A specification, which essentially refers to the basic finishing of the interior space. It also includes an initial local marketing period of 3 months via a range of outreach methods already established by the Truman Brewery. And this includes a variety of different methods: engagement and promotion through the brewery's business network and mailing lists, promotion via the social media channels, hosting open house type events targeted at local micro and small enterprises to showcase the affordable workspace that's available, promotion through various Truman Brewery projects such as the Free Range and Fashion East, engaging with independent and local property agents, and promotion via the local planning authority and the contacts within the council's growth and economic development team. Furthermore, priority would be given to occupiers who are based locally. The definition we have agreed on is those businesses that are Tower Hamlets business rate payees, existing Tower Hamlets council tax payees, or businesses based within a 3-mile radius of the development. Finally, a strategy for seeking occupiers that are in keeping with the nature and character of existing workspace occupiers within the Truman Brewery estate and the wider Brick Lane and Spitalfields area will be secured, with a strong focus on attracting local independents. I show here a summary slide of the previous offer and the updated offer, which I'm happy to come back to when we need to set it out, hopefully quite clearly. The first line obviously being the amount and duration of the affordable workspace, then the restriction of business sizes, then the quality of the space, then the local marketing, then the prioritisation of local businesses, and then finally the strategy for selection of occupiers. I now turn to the independent retail. In policy terms, the local plan does not contain any specific requirement to secure independent retail floor space. However, Principle 11 of the City Fringe Development Principles in the local plan seeks to reinforce the city fringe character of small independent shops and businesses. In response to this principle, at committee in April, the applicant proposed to secure independent retail units as part of the proposed development. The amount of retail floor space targeted towards independent retail is comprised of 3 retail units, which amounts to 20% of all retail units for a period of 20 years. There was also, at the previous committee, a restriction on businesses to SMEs that essentially operate no more than 10 branches within London or employ no more than 250 people. In the proposed scenario, the number of units remains unchanged. However, the restriction has been significantly reduced, similar to the affordable workspace to capture small businesses, essentially reducing the number of employees from 250 to 50. Similar to the affordable workspace, there would be an independent retail strategy submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, which would include very similar requirements to the affordable workspace strategy, such as the local marketing, the prioritisation of local businesses, and the strategy for seeking retail occupiers that are in keeping with the nature and character of existing retail occupiers in the Truman Brewery estate and the wider Brick Lane and Spitalfields area. Again, I have here an update summary slide showing the previous offer and the updated offer, similar to the slide before. This slide summarises the total, all of the planning obligations amended that would be secured as part of the proposals. They include the economic incentives. Obviously, I've talked about the affordable workspace and the independent retail, transport matters and all the public realm improvements that we've seen in the CGIs, public access to the site to the north, as and when that site would potentially come forward for future development to secure wider connectivity with the within the block, and construction and compliance with the constructor's scheme. So in conclusion, the proposed amendments to the obligations would provide additional benefits to local businesses and the local community and would address the reasons for deferral. This, just to summarise, includes the increased provision and duration of affordable workspace, added restrictions on business size for both affordable workspace and independent retail, additional details for both the strategies of these obligations, which include prioritisation of local marketing, prioritisation of local businesses in their selection, and a selection of occupiers that reinforces the character of the area and also the quality of these commercial spaces. The obligations are provided in the context of a scheme that otherwise complies with the adopted development plan. On top of this, there are a significant number of new jobs generated, as well as local expenditure from the new employees and visitors, as well as many other community benefits such as significantly improved public realm and permeability, all of which contribute towards community cohesion. The Office's recommendation is that the committee grant planning permission, and I thank you for listening and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. I think, Paul, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Chair. When I introduced the item, I did say that I would introduce the update report, and I then forgot to do that. So perhaps with your permission, I'll just go through that now. So there is an update report that's been published since, published today, since deals with matters that have arisen since the publication of the agenda last week. So the committee will see that we've received 11 further letters of objection and 2 documents from the Spitalfields Trust and Save Brick Lane Coalition that go into their objections in some detail and also suggest some reasons why permission might be refused. The report comments on those reasons in some detail. The update report also gives a bit more information about the affordable workspace rents, and as Mr. Harmsworth has talked about in the presentation, it gives you an idea about what those might be indicatively based on present day values. And also the update report just confirms arrangements for monitoring the various obligations around affordable workspace if in the event permission is granted and the obligations come into effect. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. I got this already. I got that. Thank you, Paul. I now invite the committee members to ask questions of the officer's presentation. Kevin, do you want to ask?
I do, yeah. So, can I chat quickly?
Yeah, sure. But before that, Paul, just from me, as the officers already elaborated about the defer items, can you take it through again the commitment the developer has given to us after the defer item, and what are the benefits benefited the local people will have. And also, I just wanted to ask you one question about local neighborhood plan. I want you to make a comment on that, because we are working very closely with the Spitalfield Trust on local neighborhood plan, and they are going to approve this on 11th of November. How does it affect this application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, firstly, in terms of, if you like, the commitments that you said the applicant has made, so those are largely sort of set out in the report, and they are really the range of if you like, financial and non-financial planning obligations that you've heard about in the presentation as well, around changes to the affordable workspace offer and changes to the independent retail offer, and the various strategies that are linked to those. So those are the commitments, and they would be secured in a legally binding Section 106 agreement. And then that means that those obligations then are enforceable by the council, so because they're in that agreement. But also we have, as is quite common with lots of agreements of this nature, we need to monitor how those are being delivered. And in the update report, we've just highlighted that the monitoring, the way that we propose that would take place is that once the affordable workspace has been agreed and come into operation, then the monitoring would take place after an initial 3-month local marketing period, and then thereafter through a series of annual reporting on the marketing and occupancy of the workspace. So that almost does two things in a way. One, it gives the council information on whether the obligations are being delivered in the way that are set out. But secondly, if the marketing strategy isn't quite doing what we expected it to do, then the monitoring in a way gives evidence that would allow the council to go back to the applicant and maybe see a further amendment. So in a way, it allows the strategy to evolve over time. So hopefully that, we can explain that a bit more if we need to, but hopefully that sort of gives you some assurance on that. In terms of the neighbourhood plan, very important point to mention, it has been alluded to in the report, that the Spitalfields neighbourhood plan has now been on its journey through its draft and through its consultation, through examination. The examiner's report was published, I think, on 16th of July. Neighbourhood plans form part of the development plan, so they sit alongside the council's local plan and the London plan when you're making your decisions. Yep. And Section 70 of the Town Country Planning Act says that actually you do not have to wait for the referendum to take place. If there is a draft plan and it's been through examination, then any policies within that plan that are material to your decision making should be applied. And our view is that the proposals are consistent with the Spitalfields neighbourhood plan, and indeed there was a slide a bit earlier that just talked about how the affordable workspace is really adhering to the level of discount that's being asked for in that plan rather than in the council's local plan. So it's a bigger level of discount in the Spitalfields neighbourhood plan, and that's what's been negotiated with the applicant. I think Mr. Harmsworth just moved it onto the screen. So it's policy Spital 7 of the draft neighbourhood plan is the one that's being applied in this case.
Okay. The next one, before I ask my colleagues, is I wanted to find out from you. There is concerns, and I, as you know, I live around there, and I have seen this. What is your view, as officers? Have you considered that the corporate companies coming to the Spitalfield neighbourhoods or Brick Lane, how do you think that will not affect the local business?
I think it would be unwise for me to sort of offer a comment either way, because, and the reason I say that is not to discount the level of concern, because undoubtedly this is an incredibly sensitive planning application, and we are all cognizant of the level of objection and the concerns that were raised, some in a lot of detail at the meeting in April. However, the planning system is concerned with the use and development of land, and really it's about the use of the building and not the occupiers. So really, in a way, if an occupier who might be, depending on your definition of corporate, were to move in, then there isn't really a planning issue with that. Okay. Having said that, what we have tried to do within the bounds of possibilities in terms of planning is to get to a position where we think that the development offers the best possible opportunities to get the best possible mix of business types into the development. And that's the approach that we've taken. And hopefully, the committee can see some of the detail there around affordable workspaces, around independent. We're trying to reach out to independent businesses and independent retailers. And I would say that we have got to a position that is, within the bounds of possibilities, within what the planning system can actually deal with, to try to, as far as we can, address some of those concerns.
Great. Paul, just I wanted to bring it to your attention. Obviously, the office has recommended to give the planning permissions, but for the history, there was 4 community in Brick Lanes. It starts from Huguenot, then Irish, then Jewish, and fourthly the Bengali. And for last centuries, we have seen how these community from the poverty they have struggled and they developed from the brick lane, and very hardly they're surviving at the 21st century. Have you, in your mind, have you ever, the officers, considered the situations of bringing the corporate companies in the brick lane?
Chair, I don't want to sort of go over sort of my answer to the previous question, but what I would say is Brick Lane has an absolutely fascinating and rich cultural history, which, and more so than many other places in some ways. But part of that history, I think, as you've alluded to, is that process of, Brick Lane has changed, it's evolved, it has done over time, and probably will continue to do so to a certain extent. What this application tries to do is to meet the full range of planning policies and try to provide a development that is contextually sensitive to Brick Lane, not just in terms of its physical and built environment, but also in terms of the social and economic dynamic of the place. So it's trying to respond to that. As I said earlier, we can't really use the planning system to dictate precisely who's going to occupy new space, in the same way that we couldn't use the planning system to dictate who might occupy new housing. It's the same sort of issue. But yes, I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you for the information, Paul. Kevin?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the officers for the presentation. We need to stick to the reasons for deferral, don't we? So in terms of this local marketing period and the strategy for seeking occupiers, has this happened before? Is there a test for this elsewhere? Is planning requirements like this being put on developments in other boroughs, for example? Do we know how this actually works in practice, or is this something entirely new? I'm just a bit concerned that I've not seen this before. It does feel fairly new. We've mentioned how the monitoring will work, etc. But have we got any sort of evidential base for how that works? How that process would go?
I think, in fact, I remember in our previous committee, I think that the legal officer at the time did find a small nod, I suppose, in the agreement to prioritising local businesses. So I think that sort of criteria has been there, albeit maybe on a slightly smaller scale. What we have done, or what we have sought to achieve with this agreement, is certainly going further than I think we've ever gone before, as far as I'm aware. And I think, as Mr. Buckingham mentioned, that is in sort of direct response really to, I suppose, the unique nature of Brick Lane and the diversity of Brick Lane, and also the level of interest that this proposal is fostered. I mean, we have, when we are, I mean, it's set out in the deferral report, there are 3 tests, as I'm sure everyone's aware, in terms of planning obligations, and one of those is about fairness and being reasonable. And I think we've worked hard, and we've worked hard with Mr. Mafozal behind me in the economic team, development team, and legal to come up with this strategy, which we think will firstly address the reasons for deferral, but will actually work and will prioritise local businesses through several different strands. And yet we're pretty confident that can be achieved. Obviously, a lot of this information we can work on following committee to really get down into the detail, but what we have are a series of heads of terms and commitments from the applicant which we feel achieve that.
Councillor Ray may come in. Yeah. I mean, I think this marketing strategy, it's not, some of it is really seeking to, if you like, curate some of the spaces. And to answer the question you asked, yes, there are precedents of, in other, I think primarily I have to say in other boroughs, in terms of curation. I mean, in fact, the Bishopsgate Goods Yard, there was actually a curation in terms of retail. I think perhaps one of the boroughs that's been leading on this is Camden Council, in terms of curating staff. I mean, again, Hackney have an independent, often seek independent, and that's supported in the development plan in the way that it is, as Mr. Harmonsworth set out. We don't have that within the development plan. So the answer is yes, there are. I don't think they're not common across local plan authorities, but there certainly are examples. And then I think, in terms, as Mr. Buckingham set out, I think there are parallels, if you like, with how we do monitoring in the context of other themes, if you like, that we capture by obligations. I mean, sometimes the analogy of a school travel plan, I think, is a good one, where you're always where the applicants or the school submits, and then we assess it and seek to tweak it, as if it were, if there are shortcomings, so that improvements happen year on year.
Sorry, and I didn't catch the name of the officer. This has been sorry. Okay, and this has been done in collaboration with you, and I didn't quite catch which.
So I'm in the Growth and Economic Development Division.
Sorry, you need to.
I'm in the Growth and Economic Development Division of the Council. I'm Senior Business Growth Manager, so I consult on pre-application, I provide pre-application support right through to the discharge of the obligations, everything relating to affordable workspace, employment, enterprise, and making sure that what we negotiate through the planning processes, they're monitored and they're adhered to, so effectively.
So is it? I mean, perhaps maybe you could sort of elaborate a bit on how we've got to this planning condition, or how you see it working, what you think in practice it would actually mean. You know, when the applicant fulfils these planning obligations, and they are planning obligations, aren't they? They will have to abide by them. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how practically it would work when we get to the point, and whether or not it does address some of the concerns that we raised in the last committee, and that obviously we know have been concerns raised by the general public in their letters of objection. Is it possible for you to just run through that a bit?
Sure. Firstly, I suppose addressing the point of affordable workspace, I think given the definitions that we've tried to put in for small businesses, and previously them not actually existing, and also through the marketing endeavours on
affordable workspace in terms of the types of businesses that they would actually seek to target. The approach taken here actually goes a step beyond what we would usually negotiate through affordable workspace strategies and the marketing elements, particularly in the way in which the number of mediums and the number of avenues that will be used to try and target workspace and to try and, I suppose, target the sorts of businesses that might occupy these spaces. And on the point of the independent retail, again, I think that because of the period in terms of the kind of submission before the space is actually let, if in the monitoring documents that are submitted to us, if there's any kind of discrepancies, the flexibility is there for us to go back and look at what isn't actually working through that strategy period, and then negotiate something that, if there is a requirement to actually negotiate anything further, to be able to make sure that, you know, we're addressing that kind of balance between attracting new businesses but also supporting the existing businesses in the area.
Can I just carry on with this? Yeah, it's all right. So I suppose one of the things that's sometimes confusing, I think, for members of the public when they watch the planning process is obviously that, you know, our role is to effectively apply the rules, to apply planning policy, not just to make arbitrary decisions about whether or not we like or dislike an application. And of course, within our local plan, you know, and we've discussed this before, that, you know, there are other boroughs that perhaps have, you know, slightly, is advanced the right word, slightly better policy around things like, you know, the affordable workspace and stuff. And I know our policy of 10%. This does, you know, there are concessions made within this, and I think, you know, we have gone quite a way beyond what is the minimum policy requirement. I recognise that. I know there's been a concern raised about effectively saying that because it's only 10%, then 90% of it is corporate, for example. Obviously, the Truman Brewery currently exists and is currently operating a model. And I think we did discuss this at the previous committee meeting, but what can you just remind us what the current model is at the Truman Brewery? Like, where are they in terms of independent businesses, local businesses, etc.? Because I think I remember it being discussed, and forgive me for not running through the document, but I think it was discussed in that meeting.
Yes, I can summarise this in the original committee report, so I'll just find that section. So probably easier if I just read out this small section. So it's right at the beginning of the report, paragraph 1.2. The Truman Brewery site, taken as a whole, is characterised by serving as a home to many small and independent tenants across a range of uses. And this is summarised as approximately 300 businesses, of which 297 are small to medium-sized enterprises, and 205 are micro businesses, which, in the definition of micro business, is 0 to 9 employees. 102 of 103 retail businesses are independent, using the definition we had in this report at the time. All 16 food and drink businesses are independent, and there are approximately 160 workspace businesses, the majority of which are in the creative industry. And there are approximately 20 event spaces in various sizes, 5 workshops and 225 market stall pitches. And I think what that obviously helps to demonstrate is that, I suppose the type of businesses and the type of and the amount of independent employment and businesses that Truman's currently show in their business model.
And I feel like I know the answers already, but just to clarify, I mean, there isn't a basis in planning where you could effectively say we want 100% of that workspace to be effectively affordable. I mean, that's not something that, you know, it would be easily appealable, presumably.
I think I mentioned the tests earlier, which are obviously as part of the regulations when you are devising coming up with the obligations, and again those tests, I will just quickly summarise them. They need to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. They need to be directly rated to the development, and they need to be fairly and reasonably rated in scale and kind to the development. And I think in our application of those tests, which we are bound by, we do think that the offer that we have and the applicant, they have gone above and beyond policy and the requirements to provide a development that otherwise accords with the development plan, but also provides, in planning officer's opinion, very favourable planning obligations that are fairly fair and reasonable. And I haven't made that assessment, but one might say that to oblige 100% of that floor space might not be fair and reasonable. Again, we haven't made that assessment. I don't want to say that categorically, but those are the tests that we work by.
So it's effectively a case of you're setting a minimum requirement that is, acceptable in legal terms. Is effectively
a minimum requirement that is that has clearly gone above and beyond the policy requirements.
Yeah, thank you.
So before you say, can I just quickly ask something to help you? This is a question for Paul, for you. I'm a bit naive about these situations. I mean, we have put the development nearby, Bishop Chris Goodyear's, and it's going for a long time, and still we are not happy about the development, the proposal we have. I wanted to ask you about the Truman Bureau. Why we have not asked the Truman Bureau, or we have not shown any keen interest to see the whole master plan of the Truman Bureau. Obviously, for this is a small development, and after that, there are already planned. They have got a plan. Why there is nothing kind of that in front of us? A master plan for the Truman Bureau.
Chair, in terms of why there isn't one, I mean, there may be multiple reasons, but I suppose, in summary, there is an up-to-date local plan, and that does have, a vision for this part of Tower Hamlets and sets out the relevant planning policies. In terms of a master plan around comprehensive development, I mean, that could mean a whole host of different things. To have any real planning weight, at the very least, it would have to be a supplementary planning document, which means it couldn't reinvent policy. It would have to sort of, be consistent with local plan policies anyway. There is probably, I don't have the detail, but there is probably an issue around resources anyway, in terms of where the council has focused its energy in terms of areas of change and where that additional guidance might be required. Now, that's not to say that there might not be that work done in the future, but as we are today, we have to determine the application based on the relevant policies and the development plan and any other material considerations. So I hope that helps, Chair.
Kahar Chaudhry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I wanted a point of clarity as regards the Spitalfields plan, and you've made reference to that during the presentation. And there was a reference made to the rent being set, which is indicative of the local area and the local business. And then we're saying within those documentation that it is from £22 to 24 square feet. Is that the case? And I just wanted to understand whether that was aligned with the indicative of the local businesses within the area, in the local area of Brick Lane. On the affordable workspace, I think the gentleman earlier answered about the new start-ups. I suppose I'm looking at, so with these restrictions on businesses and, it has to be below 50 employees and 10 million and the 5 million, etc. There's been concerns expressed by local businesses and indeed residents about, say, corporations, and the chair indeed alluded to that earlier on in his questioning of this application, that a corporate business comes along, and I don't think we've got many offices here, and they just take over. You take 100, I take 100, end of the matter, and the local people lose out. So for us, I guess the consideration here is of taking the local people, our residents and local businesses along the journey of redevelopment, and so that they benefit from it, and hence why, the 10%, and then officers have negotiated that to 10% over 15 years, and the retail unit's been another 20% of independent businesses. It's reassuring to hear that overall the Truman operations of business is very much, creative industry and independent businesses and so on. So I wanted you to allay those concerns surrounding, that proposition that people are rightly concerned about, that, a couple of corporates can come along and just say, we'll take over the whole of the, new development. So, to address that concern and clarity over, given local people and businesses assurance that it is aligned with the rental is aligned with the local indicative rent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just, I'll touch first on the first question. I mean, I might actually bring in my colleague in a second, who certainly knows a lot more about me on the rents in the local area. But so as I've set out in my presentation, I suppose, to help articulate these rents in real pounds, we sought to work with the applicant to work out what that might look like, and as I set out, applying that 45% discount to an indicative market rent within that very central location in Brick Lane district centre, and getting to around the region of 22 to just under £25 per square foot. I mean, Mr. Mafosa, I know that we've discussed, and when one takes into account similar floor spaces, similar businesses, that is a very good rate for that location. I don't know if you want to. Would you like to just touch on that a bit?
Sure. When you consider the prevailing commercial rents for the area in itself, and the actual increase in rents, actually, this represents a very good value in terms of the actual market and what we'd actually secure. And you could compare it, actually, those baseline rents, regardless of this being an office scheme, you can actually compare it to most types of employment space typologies, and you'll actually see that the discounts that have actually been secured and those indicative rents will actually still be affordable in terms of the levels, even after a 15-year period, because those rates are kind of unprecedented for that actual area. So what that will actually allow for is a group of businesses to actually come in and start, trade, and actually grow, and so add value to the existing businesses in the area, and also allow for new businesses to come along and flourish as well, to create a good, strong ecosystem of different types of businesses.
I think it's also worth. Obviously, you have to compare like with like, if you will. So to answer your question, and the Spitalfield Locals Plan is no different, if you like, from our policy in the local plan, is that it can't be just a comparison between existing employment space that may be very old, needs upgrading. So obviously you need to compare like with like. So that there has to be, you have to compare against existing office space of a good quality, if you like, new space. So it's also a challenge. The average employment space in the surrounding area may be lower than the sums mentioned, referenced in the report, but clearly you need to have regard for the nature of that space. And but I think it is, as Mr. Mosil has said, I think it is also interesting to note that these rates are fall within the range, if you like, in fact, towards the bottom of the range within, or perhaps middle of the range within the Truman Brewery estate itself, which I think is it reflects, well, I'm mindful that this would be new office space of, if you like, A quality, whilst obviously a significant amount of the employment space or the space within the Truman's Brewery is old space, if you like, space that needs, that ultimately a real estate kind of expert would normally requires modernisation or will need upgrading at some time in the future.
Shall I just touch on that second question quickly? So, I mean, the best way I suppose I can, for me, there are a handful of really important considerations, which is what, for me, I believe that the character of this scheme is not one that points towards the sort of corporate character that gets talked about quite a lot in many of the objections. I mean, the first one we've already touched upon is the applicant themselves and Truman Brewery, and I suppose the overwhelming amount they've achieved in the area and the level of independence that they do help to accommodate, and even the very small number of businesses within the estate that aren't small to medium-sized enterprises, one of which actually occupies the building H, which is on the site. Even that itself is a creative firm, it deals with fashion and other design aspects. So, and I think that's quite a big indication of the character of Truman Estate and what their business model is pointed towards. And it's not one, in my opinion, that is based on a sort of corporatisation. The second thing I think is actual character of the design itself and the location. We are in Brick Lane, which has this fantastic diversity, and the design very much has sought to mirror the sort of warehouse industrial aesthetic of the brewery buildings, as you can see. So there has been initially there was a level of glazing proposed on the upper floors of that building, but as what the applicant has, I believe, been very responsive to, firstly throughout pre-application and officers' advice, but also the representations we received, they have sought to respond to those concerns. And, for example, that included removing all of the glazing and making it fully brick with metal windows, and that aesthetic's really come through. So I think that the character of the design is not one that would indicate or potentially be attractive to a sort of more corporate company. The second thing just to point on is that the floor plates themselves aren't actually that big. One might think that they look quite large, but they are actually quite long and thin. And so if you would consider, say, a Canary Wharf, which they really are big floor plates where corporations like to locate, this really, it's a big scheme for Brick Lane, but in relative terms, those floor plates aren't that big, and actually they've been designed to be flexible, which is what the local plan specifically directs us to accommodate. It's very much the emerging, I suppose, attractive quality of workspace. Flexibility is key. And that floor space has been designed to be flexible, easily subdivided, and capable of accommodating, potentially hundreds of SMEs. And then fourthly, it's just the obligations I've talked about, which I appreciate are focused only on the affordable workspace and the independent retail, but they clearly, as I set out in this table, they are purely focused on local businesses. So I suppose my point is that one can never be, can never say categorically about what type of businesses that space would accommodate. But I think that there are some really important moves and design moves that really influence the character of this scheme that I believe that doesn't make it an attractive scheme for large corporations. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much for the answers. I've got two quick things that I wanted to ask. One was about a concern that a shopping mall is being created there, and it is not in keeping with the character and of the local retail that's available there and the shops that are available there. But having a look at the plan, it's only about 12 retail or shops, and then 20% is independent. I wanted to allay those concerns and elaborate on that point, that whether it can be deemed as a shopping mall. I know the answer to that, but I'd like you to address that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this scheme absolutely is not a shopping mall in character. We have a new street which is largely open air through the middle of the scheme. We have only, as you mentioned, 15 pretty small retail units leading around that internal street, leading to a square. I don't want to. I mean, I can only say the character of this is not a shopping mall in character. It's one that very much. We're talking about a car park here. Interestingly, a vacant site. It's been vacant for 30 or 40 years, and actually, it's reintroducing the urban fabric of that area with new connections through, in my opinion, excellent public realm, new public square, and actually, so it's actually the response in design terms and townscape terms is very positive, and certainly not one that's akin to a shopping mall.
Thank you. Just one more, Chair.
Yeah, go on.
One more, very quickly. It's just on the existing businesses that are there. You may not have the answer to that, but do we have an indication from the applicant whether they're going to continue operating, because some of them are, local businesses that are there and they're part of that local community and the business community there. So in terms of the rent and etc., is it viable? For some it may not be, or they may see it as an opportunity to move to something better or elsewhere. But I wanted to know whether we have an indication from the applicant whether the existing businesses are going to retain and be there on the favourable terms that they are currently there, or does it significantly change, and hence we have this argumentation of gentrification, etc. Thank you.
So, actually, obviously because a large part of the site is a car park, and the only businesses that are on site are within that. I'll go to the slide quickly, actually, to show which. So this is Building H here, which you will remember from the site visit. So this has been retained on the site, and actually the floor space on the upper floors it isn't being changed, and the occupiers within that building remain, and I'm told they're very supportive of the proposals, and so that there is no displacement of local businesses as a result of this application.
Kevin?
Just on that point then as well, because I know, another concern has been the office, and I feel like, again, I know the answer to this, but maybe just for clarity, we don't, obviously in the local plan we identify areas which would be quite office-led, obviously Canary Wharf we see is very office-led, although it's becoming more mixed, and round sort of the Aldgate Whitechapel area I know is fairly office-led in the local plan. We don't see this in the context of it being a large office being built in an area that wouldn't otherwise be identified for office. It's existing offices already there, and maybe some additional workspace that doesn't quite. We're not seeing it in the context of a new Canary Wharf being built in Brick Lane.
Absolutely right. It's as I said, the additional floor space is actually relatively small. It's a town centre location where, and we support new workspaces and offices as town centre uses. The number of jobs that would be created by this is significant. Over 500, 600 new jobs, and so absolutely not. As I said, the character of this office-led scheme is not one that is a Canary Wharf type or a city type. It's very much in keeping with the Brick Lane area and the wider Spitalfields area.
Chair, can I just...
Yeah,
Sorry.
come through.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to rehash stuff we talked about last time as well either, but just because you mentioned it when you were answering Councillor Chowdhury's question, obviously it is currently a car park and the wall will be going. I know we've obviously seen from the graphics, but I think one of the things that came up in the previous meeting was obviously the car park is relatively new in terms of the age of Brick Lane. I think it was the 80s it was created. But there was a building there before that, presumably as part of the brewery. And I think, am I right in saying, just to go over what we talked about last time, that it is of a similar scale and massing? It was of a similar scale and massing to what's currently being proposed. I think we had an image last time around, didn't we?
Yeah, I can actually pull up that image. It might be easy to talk to. So this shows the historic massing, which actually, interestingly, was only demolished in the late 70s, early 80s, so not that long ago. And actually, the type of massing you can see here, I think it's part 4 stories, but it's hard up against the pavement. You can see the narrowness of Woodsley Street, and there are actually a small number of commercial units along that street as well. But these buildings are very much in connection with the brewery at the time before they were demolished. And actually, what you get is it is a more sensitive scheme that's being proposed now, because what we have is, firstly, as I've mentioned, we have the leaning away of the new building with quite significant ladder effect. We also have the slight widening of Woodsley Street with a much wider pavement that is obviously much more usable in street trees. So actually, the impact would be much less in the proposed scenario when compared to this historic massing, which is obviously, as you can see, much more hard up against the pavement and straight up 4 stories.
Yeah. You finished, yeah?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Who is our officer who have contacted with the developer? Elias, is that you?
We all have Mr. Hammersworth and myself, and Mr. Buchan on occasion, but primarily myself and Mr. Hammersworth here.
Okay, Gerald. I wanted to ask you something. Have you visited Commercial Street?
Yes.
Have you seen the new corporate company, the UNQ big company, set up in the Commercial Street?
Are you referring to the Fruit and Wool Exchange? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think returning back to what Mr. Hammersworth said.
No, I'm just asking you. Have you seen it?
Yes.
What we have seen in the locally, in the Commercial Street or the Spitalfield Market, there was all the local people, and previously in 70s, 80s, they had worked, they had jobs, unemployed people had opportunity. But because of this, all this the development in Spitalfield and Spitalfield Market and the city coming to the near the Brick Lanes, it's all disappeared. The reason I'm just bringing this, the officer mentioned about the diversity, and I'm really glad that he mentioned about the diversity. But when the matter was deferred, the committee was concerned about the community cohesion aspect of the matter. A slightly better term for the workspace, no doubt about it, and no better term for the retails. Neither there is any improvement of the community cohesion. That is my concern. Secondly, when you talk about the whole of 146 Brick Lane, Block 8 in the scheme, is currently occupied by the Urban Global Fashion. That's the company. It is not a collection of independent small businesses. It is one huge one. There is nothing to stop the new 90% unaffordable workspace also going to one huge company. I just wanted to know, officers, of course, officers recommending, and we wanted development, no doubt. But I wanted to make sure that the community cohesions and the diversity we have. We don't want our community cohesion and community small business to disappear because of the corporate companies. It's another word. The small fish normally they eat the big fish. Small they eat fish. I wanted you to answer these questions. When we talk about the Spitalfield neighborhood plan, and that neighborhood plan is going on 11th of December, strategically they're going to approve it. And in that Spitalfield neighborhood plans, they also talk about that Truman plan, Truman development. So why we don't, in conjunction with our officer report, not mentioning about the improvement of the Spitalfield neighborhood plan and the improving, and when they're improving on 11th of November, obviously it's going to approve and council is going to recognize that plan, the neighborhood plan, and we have to cooperate with our Spitalfield neighborhood plan. What's your view on this?
Maybe just break that down into sort of different parts. I mean, I think it's important to distinguish between.
There's 3 points.
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish between the employment, between the employment space in the proposal and the retail, because obviously we are all familiar, if you like, with relatively small retail units that are occupied by national chains, or if you like, corporates. In terms of, and obviously the provision of some independent retail units goes some way to address that, and then there's the marketing strategy, which we've discussed, which also seeks to deal with that matter. In terms of the
community cohesion,
I think in terms of the office, and as I said, I think Mr. Buckingham and Mr. Harmsworth have said already, we can't preclude, obviously, we can't say who will occupy them, but I think it is worth pointing out that the building form doesn't lend itself to large office corporations, if you will. Yeah, if you look at the Fruit and Wool Exchange, I appreciate there are concerns about the ground plane and the retail units and the nature of the occupiers of those. Yeah, and some concerns that they don't necessarily reflect that, the diversity, into the local diversity, the local character of retail. But if you look at, in terms of the upper floors, that is a series of large office floor plates, that lend themselves to a single occupation by a corporate occupier, and that indeed is what has happened in that instance. The design of this doesn't lend itself to that. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be a series of small businesses that might be appropriately characterised as national corporations. But I think there's a distinction to be made there. And then in terms of, I think, the community cohesion, and I think it kind of arches back to a certain degree to what Councillor Brady was asking about in terms of the marketing strategy and previous precedents of doing that. I think we're, well, fortunate, maybe it's not the right word, but I think we're not dealing with a blank slate in terms of the broader Truman's Brewery estate, yeah? And so we do have, if you like, it's not like the developer is trying to create an ecosystem and trying to imagine from scratch how you create a diverse set of retail units, a diversity, a series of independents. That is present on the wider estate, and that's already, if I refer to 3.6 in the update report, that's, you can see in the contents, if you like, of the marketing strategy, that's making reference back to that. So I think it's for the decision maker, I think it's worth bearing in mind that. I mean, obviously we have to be careful because we can't assume that the applicant before us would necessarily be the developer who builds it out. But I think we do have, whoever if it were consent granted, obviously we have the outlines of how this marketing strategy would seek to be consistent with community cohesion, and we could apply the if you like the roadmap that's set out within that for any prospective developer, even if it's not the developer, even if it's not the applicant before us. So I hope that goes some way to address your concerns.
Paul, can I ask you a question, please? Yeah.
Of course you can.
The draft Spitalfield neighbourhood plan contained a policy for the site, and it is mentioned in the positive light in the officer's report in 3.4. Therefore, surely the decision on this application, if we say we will, I will talk about myself. If I say that I want to see that defer until the decision of Spitalfield neighbourhood plan on 11th of November, so that all of the policy it contained can be properly considered in our decision. How do you take that? It's my personal question, not the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the neighbourhood plan, as I said earlier, has been through quite a journey in terms of its development, and it's now sort of been through a formal examination in public. The examiner's report's been published, and the plan is now really at a stage where you can give it practically full weight in terms of the decision making, and I think Section 70 of the 1990 Act sort of confirms that in a way. So it says that draft neighbourhood plans that have been subject to examination can be afforded that level of weight. So I wouldn't really see what the advantage would be to any further delay pending the referendum, which I think is scheduled for, colleagues might know, November, I think. So, because in a way, the plan itself won't change. The plan will still be there because it's been through the examination stage. I mean, I suppose that then the natural follow-on question is if members of the committee in some way feel that there are policies in that plan that haven't been properly applied to this application. And we're not aware of any. And indeed, we've used the plan to our advantage in terms of the negotiations to get a greater reduction in terms of the level of affordable workspace, which we wouldn't have been able to do just under the council's own local plan, for example. So.
Do my colleagues, anybody has got any question?
No questions.
So if not the questions, shall we go to the vote?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one, this, isn't it, Chair? Because, we sometimes get these applications that have quite enormous levels of public interest. I mean, there are thousands of objections against this application. I think, I've been wrestling with this over the weeks and obviously read through the reports and stuff, and I think that, we need to be clear as a committee what our role in this is, and I think sometimes that is, confusing for us, sometimes it's certainly confusing for the public. I know, if you look at what being a councillor is, of course, part of it is advocacy and representing your constituents, etc. That is an important part of it, doing casework, etc. We know we're all members of a political party, and that's another key bit of it. But when we sign up to do this, there is an agreement that we have some fundamental statutory functions that we have to fulfil, like licensing and planning. And I don't think it is a quasi-judicial function as such, but it is certainly an application of rules. And we do all agree to the principle that we have to consider the application against planning terms. We're not making determinations on whether or not we like something or we like the developer. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is I personally don't see there are any planning reasons or grounds for refusal of this application. I understand that will be disappointing to some people. We've discussed a number of the issues that were raised in the objections, but we do need to have planning grounds to turn down the application, and it is a pointless exercise, I think, for the committee and for the council as a whole to refuse applications which will clearly be allowed on appeal. I mean, that is not the aim of this committee, and it shouldn't be something we should be trying to do. What I would suggest I suppose so. I'm saying I will vote in favour of the application, but what I would like to suggest as a committee, because it has been, a contentious issue, if we weren't minded to grant permission, I would think that, as a committee, we would suggest to the lead member for planning and to our officers as well, because a lot of the issues that have been raised are actually about planning policy, not things that we as a committee, we don't make planning policy, we interpret it, we make a decision based on it. But I would suggest that we as a committee write perhaps to the lead member, to officers, and see that this is quite an emerging area. How do we address some of these concerns? Maybe in the next draft of the local plan, how do we move forward with taking some of these issues so that members of the public have concerns about gentrification? Tower Hamlets is an area that has huge change. I wonder if maybe we could ask officers and the lead member to look at how we formulate policy for the future that addresses some of these issues in ways that we haven't quite been able to under the current local plan, the current policy framework. So if we are minded to grant permission, that would be my suggestion as a committee.
Thank you, Kevin. Before I go to the ask my colleague Kahar, I would say, of course, Kevin, we have to make a decision in open mind, and this is an independent body, the development committee. And secondly, of course, we are also all independent. We have got our own methodology, and our view, and also experience of the locality, and also concern about the constituents. No doubt about it that we will not go against the planning term, that's definite. But at the same time, we have to, obviously, that's natural, we have to question the officers. Although most of the time officers recommend, sometimes they don't recommend, but we as independent individual bodies, we have to think ourselves as open-minded. And I'm not convinced about the questions I raised and about the locality. So that's, of course, it's your view, but when you go to the vote, the individual people will vote in their way they would like. But obviously, I will be voting against on the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is one that has drawn a great deal of attention on this application, and I think the reasons for, as Councillor Brady said earlier, and you spoke about it too, I think with these applications, obviously, we approach it with an independent mind and look at it on merits of a particular given application. And when we do that, we've got to look whether the applicant satisfies the planning requirements. And in this instance, well, when this application previously came about, it was us as councillors who raised various issues, and reasons for deferral. Now they've come back and they've actually exceeded those issues that we raised. And if a particular, you see, the quagmire or predicament I'm having is, and it's actually quite clear to me that if an application is deferred for particular reasons, and then the applicant comes back and addresses those reasons and exceeds the planning requirements, then it's very, very difficult to then say, well, we're going to refuse it for X, Y, Z. And their position is strengthened because we've refused, we deferred it on these particular reasons. They've come back, exceeded it. And now the prospect of success, say we were to refuse it on appeal, would be fairly high in my view, and it would be a pointless exercise, and we would incur considerable amounts of costs as well that we need to be mindful of. And I think, and we've asked questions about various aspects of it and the deferral and so on. And I'm satisfied that they've exceeded the reasons for deferral. And then I would draw your attention to, and indeed to councillors, the benefits of the application. Currently there's half of it erected. There's an office, then there's a car park, etc. It's all run down, and we've been there. Now what they're doing is they're creating this pathway to lead across the road to that market, there's enhancement of public realm, there's seal money, there's a injection of economic impetus within it there's a lot of money that's going to come into the borough investment and so on. And I think on the balance, this application should be allowed. I hear loud and clear what our residents and businesses are saying, and I said previously whilst questioning officers that we need to take our local businesses and residents along with that journey so that they benefit from these particular developments. And I think it's more about perhaps engaging the different diverse communities within that development and understanding that, because I do think they have exceeded it and they probably had scope to go a little bit further, whether it was on retail or whether it was on the affordable space. But we deferred it on the specific reasons. They've come back, exceeded it, and now if we refuse it, I mean, it's going to be allowed on appeal. That's my view, and therefore, I think, and it's a question of fairness and reasonableness to the applicant as well. Once you state some of the reasons and they come back and exceed it, it's actually unfair to then go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to refuse your application. It just seems quite unfair on the applicant. So that would be my view, and I would allow this application for those reasons. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, on that point, I think, because we have as a committee, I think it's important to note that we have refused application before, and of course when we do that in the terms of reference, we do have to give planning reasons for that refusal. And I think hand on heart, I think we would struggle to come up with planning reasons for refusal. But I totally respect. You may disagree with me on that one.
Listen, it's all independent ourselves, and this is an independent body. Nobody interfere with this body. That's your view, and I have said my view, so nobody can take my view. That's me, and I can make my independent decision, okay? So, thank you. I checked that everyone that wishes to speak has had an opportunity to do so. So can I see all, now I'm going to the vote, can I see all those in favor of the officer's recommendation to grant the planning permission? Thank you. Any against? I'm voting against. So, officer, one is against, as I said, and so please, can Mr. Buckingham confirm the result of the vote and the committee decision?
Bear with me, Chair. I think Ms. Foley was...
No, she can't vote. She can speak. Sorry, the Lima Kurishi, the councillor, she's in quarantine. She had the opportunity to speak, but unfortunately we didn't hear anything from her, but she can vote. So it's only 3 people here. Okay, thank you.
That is correct, Chair. So on a vote of 2 in favour and 1 against, the committee has resolved to grant planning permission for the redevelopment of the site at 140 and 146 Brick Lane and 25 Woodseer Street as set out in item 4.1 of the agenda this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. That concludes the business for this meeting. The next meeting will be held on the 14th of October 2021. Sorry.